Texas skies have a way of warning you before a storm hits. That evening, the horizon turned the color of burnished copper, and the air grew thick, as though the whole world was holding its breath. I had been in the kitchen, rinsing dishes, when my son Luke called from the living room. "Mom, you should see this sunset," he said. His voice still carried that warm mix of playfulness and certainty I'd always known, the tone that made it sound less like a suggestion and more like something I'd regret missing. I stepped out onto the porch, dish towel still in hand. The light was eerie, the kind that makes the past and present blur in your mind. Luke stood at the railing, tall now, taller than his father had been, with his arms resting on the wood as he watched the storm clouds roll in. "You're supposed to be heading back to Austin tonight," I reminded him. "Storm's moving in too fast," he said without turning. "The highway'll flood. I'll just stay here." I hesitated. He was right about the storm. And if I was honest, I didn't mind the idea of him staying. Since he'd gone off to college, the house always felt a little emptier, like the walls were stretching too far between me and the sound of his voice. When the rain came, it came all at once. Thick, heavy sheets pounding against the tin roof. The power flickered, then died, leaving us in a silence broken only by the roar of the downpour. "Looks like it's you and me tonight," Luke said with a small grin. We lit candles and sat at the kitchen table, playing cards like we used to during summer storms when he was a boy. But there was something different now. His eyes didn't dart away when they met mine. His smile lingered just a fraction too long. And when our hands brushed while reaching for the same card, neither of us pulled away immediately. The storm outside seemed to push the world in closer, the air between us warm with candlelight and quiet laughter. Around midnight, the rain eased, but the roads were still washed over. I went to grab blankets for him to sleep on the couch, but when I turned, he was standing in the doorway of the hallway, leaning against the frame with that easy confidence he'd grown into. "You know," he said, voice low, "it's weird being back here. Everything feels smaller." I smiled faintly. "That's because you've gotten bigger." "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it's just that I see things differently now." His gaze lingered, and for a moment, I felt the pull of something I didn't want to name. I turned away, fussing with the blankets. The storm had passed, but somehow, it felt like the real one had only just begun. I woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, still half asleep, I thought I was back in the years when Luke was still in high school. Those mornings when he'd wake early for practice and I'd hear him clattering around the kitchen, trying not to wake me. But when I padded in barefoot, it was different. He stood there shirtless, hair damp from the shower, steam curling from the mug in his hand. His back was broader now, his shoulders set in that easy, unself-conscious way that comes with knowing your own strength. "Morning," he said, sliding a mug across the counter toward me. "Black, like you like it." The simple gesture landed heavier than it should have. We ate in the quiet hum of a house just waking, the sound of the coffee pot and the distant drip of rain from the eaves. Outside, the fields glistened under the pale light, still soaking from the night before. "You're stuck here till at least this afternoon," I said. The low road into town's flooded. Luke glanced up, and that grin of his, slow, knowing, curved at the edges. "Guess you're stuck with me a little longer." After breakfast, he followed me out to the shed to help with some repairs I'd been putting off. The storm had rattled one of the side panels loose, and we worked side by side, the air rich with the scent of wet cedar and earth. It wasn't just the work. It was the way he handed me the hammer without asking, the way he steadied the ladder without saying a word. And when a gust of wind caught the panel I was holding, his arm came around me, firm and instinctive, pulling me close for just a heartbeat too long. We both knew when we stepped back. Inside again, we dried off, and I made lunch, grilled cheese, the way he liked it as a kid. He leaned against the counter, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off him. "You know," he said, watching me slice the sandwiches, "it's weird. I used to think of this house as yours. Now it feels different, like I'm seeing it for the first time." I didn't ask what he meant. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. That afternoon, the rain eased enough for the roads to clear, but Luke didn't seem in a hurry to leave. He sprawled on the couch, flipping idly through the TV channels until I gave up pretending to read and sat beside him. We ended up watching an old Western, the kind my father used to love. Somewhere between the gunfights and the sweeping desert shots, his hand brushed mine on the couch cushion, deliberate this time. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. The credits rolled, and outside, the sun broke through the clouds, throwing a sharp, clean light across the wet fields. Luke stretched, looking out the window. "Maybe I'll head out tomorrow instead," he said casually, as though we both didn't feel the shift that had just happened. I told myself it was because of the roads, but we both knew better. The second night felt heavier somehow, the air thick with a stillness that wasn't quite peace. I'd gone to bed early, telling myself it was just to rest after the long day, but my mind wouldn't settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed those small moments, the way Luke's hand had brushed mine on the couch, the way he'd looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Somewhere past midnight, a crash split the quiet. A sharp, echoing clatter from the direction of the barn. I sat up so fast the covers slid to the floor. My first thought was burglars, someone taking advantage of the storm-softened roads and the dark. I grabbed my nightgown from the chair and slipped it over my shoulders, heart already thudding hard in my chest. The door to Luke's room opened almost at the same moment mine did. He stepped out, hair tousled from sleep, his voice low. "You heard that too?" I nodded, already moving down the hall. He fell in behind me without another word. We stepped into the cool night air, the grass still wet under our bare feet. I carried the small night light from the kitchen like a lantern, its soft glow swinging ahead of us as we crossed to the barn. The door creaked on its hinges when I pushed it open, the faint scent of hay and oil rushing out to meet us. Inside, it was chaos. The ladder had fallen to the floor, a couple of storage boxes overturned, their contents spilled in uneven heaps. I swept the light across the shadows, my pulse pounding. And then I saw it. Two bright, gleaming eyes stared back at me from behind a stack of crates. A raccoon, fur bristling, frozen in the beam of light. A sharp, startled gasp tore from my throat, and before I knew it, I'd spun to run, only to catch my foot on the raised threshold. The stumble sent me forward, the nightlight jerking wildly in my grip, and I collided hard with the solid warmth of Luke's chest. We went down together, his arms instinctively catching me even as we hit the floorboards. For a moment, the only sound was my ragged breathing and the quick thump of his heart under my ear. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough but steady. I could feel the strength in his grip, the way he held me just enough to keep me safe but not so tight I couldn't pull away, though I didn't. Not right away. The raccoon skittered out through the open door, disappearing into the night, but neither of us moved. The beam of the night light lay across us, casting our shadows long against the wall. Finally, Luke's hand slid from my back as he helped me to my feet. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's get you inside before you break something else." His tone was teasing, but there was an edge to it, something neither of us could quite name yet. We walked back in silence, the barn settling behind us with the occasional creak. I told myself the pounding in my chest was from the scare, but deep down I knew better. Back inside, the house felt too quiet, as if the walls themselves were listening. I set the little nightlight back on the counter, my fingers still trembling from the adrenaline. Luke hovered in the kitchen, watching me with that steady, unreadable expression he got when he was holding back words. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hand shook enough that I had to set it down. "I can't," I exhaled, pressing a palm to my chest. "I can't seem to settle. My heart's still racing." He stepped closer, his voice low and sure. "It's just the scare. You're fine now." I looked up at him, at the man who not long ago was just the boy running around this house barefoot in the summer, chasing fireflies. Now, he stood here taller, broader, his presence filling the room in a way that quieted everything else. "Stay with me," I said before I could think better of it. "Just in my room, until I calmed down." His eyes searched mine for a moment, as though to make sure I meant it. Then he nodded. "All right." We walked down the hall together, our steps slow, the only sound the faint patter of rain outside. In my room, the lamp cast a warm, soft light over the familiar space. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the blanket up over my lap. Luke hesitated by the doorway before stepping inside and closing it behind him. He stayed at first in the armchair across from the bed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. We talked about the raccoon, about the storm, about anything except the sudden closeness that had taken root between us these past 2 days. But the longer we talked, the more the space between us seemed unnecessary. He got up at some point, meaning to grab the extra quilt from the dresser, and ended up sitting on the edge of the bed instead. "You're still shaking," he murmured, his eyes dropping briefly to my hands. "Maybe a little," I admitted. Without a word, he reached for my hands, his palms warm and steady. He held them lightly, not as a son to a mother, but as someone who wanted me to know I wasn't alone in that moment. It should have been simple. Comfort. Familiarity. But the air in the room shifted, subtle and deep, and I felt the edges of something I couldn't name brushing close enough to touch. The rain tapped softly against the window, and neither of us moved. The rain hadn't stopped. It had settled into a steady, whispering rhythm against the glass, the kind of sound that can make you feel like the world beyond your walls has faded away. I sat there with Luke's hands around mine, the warmth slowly seeping back into my skin, but the cold in my chest lingered. "I still can't get warm," I murmured, almost to myself. His gaze flicked toward the blanket pulled up around me, then back to my face. Without asking, he moved, slow, deliberate, to the other side of the bed. He slipped in beside me, careful not to jostle the mattress too much, the heat from his body instantly breaking through the chill I hadn't been able to shake. "It's just the nerves," he said softly. "You'll feel better soon." I lay still, aware of every inch of space between us and of how little space there actually was. His presence filled the room in a way the lamplight couldn't, steady and certain, as if the storm outside couldn't touch me here. When his hand moved, it was gentle, a slow, calming stroke along my arm, as if I were a child he was lulling to sleep after a bad dream. I didn't resist. Instead, I let myself sink into the rhythm of it, each pass of his hand easing some tightness I hadn't realized I was holding. For a moment, I did feel like a little girl again, not because I was small, but because I felt safe. Entirely, wholly safe. His voice was low, almost a murmur. "You've been holding so much on your own." I closed my eyes, swallowing hard. "That's just what you do when you're the only one left." His touch didn't falter. If anything, it became more deliberate, more grounding. The rain outside blurred into a soft backdrop, the kind of sound that pulls the night around you like a quilt. We didn't speak after that. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full, pressing in around us with all the things neither of us could say. Somewhere between one heartbeat and the next, my breathing matched his. And there, in the fragile space before dawn, it didn't matter where the lines were supposed to be. Only that neither of us wanted to move away. The rain had eased sometime before dawn, leaving the world wrapped in that fragile quiet that comes after a long storm. The air in my room felt warmer now, but I hadn't moved, not since Luke had lain down beside me hours ago. His hand still rested lightly against my arm, that slow, steady rhythm from earlier, now just an occasional trace along my skin. My breathing had steadied, but sleep never came. I'd been too aware of him beside me, of the heat radiating across the small space between us. Outside, The first pale light of morning slid through the curtains. It made everything softer, his jawline in the half-light, the way his eyes found mine as though he'd known I hadn't slept either. "You warm enough now?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though my voice caught when I said, yes. But neither of us moved. There was no storm left to blame, no raccoon in the barn, no excuse for the way the air between us tightened with each passing heartbeat. I could feel the words pressing at the back of my throat, the ones I'd been too careful to say. And when his gaze dropped briefly to my mouth before coming back to my eyes, I knew he felt it too. He shifted closer, slow enough that I could have pulled back, but I didn't. "You've been on my mind for a long time," he murmured, his voice low, almost testing. Something in me gave way then, the same way the clouds outside had given way to the sun. I reached up, brushing my fingers lightly along his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin under my touch. That was all it took. He leaned in, closing the last inches between us, and our lips met, tentative at first, the barest touch, as though we were both still afraid to believe it was real. Then it deepened, slow but certain, the quiet of the morning folding around us. When we finally drew back, the space between us felt changed, irrevocably so. Outside, the sun had cleared the horizon, painting the wet fields gold. But here, in this small, quiet room, it felt like the day hadn't truly begun yet, as if we were standing right on the edge of something neither of us was ready to name, but both of us wanted to step into.